welcome to this episode where I get to introduce the beautiful Rachel today. I'm so excited. This podcast is all about being rooted in your stories and rising to the occasion to share them. And that's really what the topics of this entire podcast are about, is really giving yourself permission to share your stories. And I'm so excited because Rachel and I have been on many different levels of many different journeys together over the last, what would we say, about 6 years now. And this is just such a special episode for me, as every episode seems to be landing as special in their own ways through the connection of shared sisterhood and doing life together. And one of our main purposes is to walk out journeys with other people as well through sharing our stories. So Rachel, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, I'm Rachel. I don't know what else you want me to share about myself, but yeah, I'm writing a book, and so I'm super excited about it, and it's part of my journey. So
I
yeah.
love that we got to do it together. I love that everyone who fell into place with this particular book, it was definitely in my belief, it was already, like it was already waiting for the people that were going to be in this book in particular. And I'm so glad that you are one of them. And that leads me to my first question. What inspired you to write your story? And what was the initial spark to put pen to paper or fingers to keyboards or anything like that? Like, what made you say yes when I put it out there?
Because it was you. And I'm being totally honest with that answer. Because when she sent that question to me, I'm like, how am I going to answer that? Because I've been wanting to write a book for a long time, and had my own blocks with that, which I'm sure we'll get into later on the interview with that. But I had my own blocks with that, and I'd had the opportunity over the last probably 15 years, 3 or 4 times, and there was always something that was externally blocking me from doing that. So I always knew, like, okay, this was not the anthology I needed to be in, or this was not the person I needed to, have as my editor or whatever. Like, many things happen with that. And then Rachelle asked, or had mentioned this kind of in a way, kind of just in bypassing in a meeting. And I was like, wait a second. Like, that's when I was like, okay, I can actually, like, it was for me, it was like, I can tell this part of my story and be really comfortable with it. Or at least I thought when I started the process. And so I was like, okay, let's do it, And so I said to my husband one day, I said, one of my business partners is going to have this book, and I think I'm going to do it. And he's like, why are you thinking about it? Just do it. And that was, my husband's the writer in our family. I am not. So, or I wasn't
You are
until now.
now.
I am now. So I'm having to own that. I actually wrote that in a bio the other day, author, and that was so weird to me to actually be able to put that in my bio. Like, I had to add it, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. I get to own another word as part of me.
Another title. I love that. How did you feel the first time that you shared your story, whether it was when you shared it with yourself or you press send to James, the editor, or did you share it with somebody else the first time before you even sent it in? How did you feel about that?
I've verbalized my story several times in like different segments. So like just snippets of it. But putting pen to paper, like, I had an outline for years of it. But then when it was like actually sitting down and like typing it and really thinking about what I wanted to add and what I didn't, that was a process for me. And when I first sent it to James, I actually sent him two versions because in my brain I had two versions, and one was very like heartfelt and the other one was very headfelt. And he picked that up instantly, and he sent the head one back and said, we're not doing this one. That's all he told me. And I was like, okay, so here we go. And so that was very much for me like a part of the process, because I had written in my head and then I had written from like spirit and heart, and that was two very different versions. And so because of my earthly training in medicine, I've had to deal with that in my writing process because I can get very analytical and scientific and, logical, and that's not what writing's about, especially with this anthology.
It's interesting. You're not the only author to mention that. And I think it's interesting that there was about half of us, or maybe a little bit more, that are very much always in our heads.
Mm-hmm.
And processes like writing a chapter for an anthology, writing your book, really just all different platforms of sharing your story really help you to start connecting to your heart. And I want
Mm-hmm.
to kind of touch on this because I know that you and I have had previous conversations about this, is really about sitting in your feminine versus your masculine as a woman, and how so much of our conditioning in life is about be masculine, be masculine, be masculine. And it dishonors the energy that we're born with and that we've been taught to put aside. And then we come to this like a lot of conflicting feelings, especially kind of midlife. I guess that would be like the female version of midlife crisis kind of thing, in terms of like discovering sometimes for the first time. And what I share with a lot of people, especially women, is that when they go into this book writing process, especially if it's their first time, it's not going to be anything they ever expected it to be. You know, you go in with intention, and this is so important with any aspect in life. You go in with intention, but it's the journey of the actions that speak louder than the intention itself. And I always tell aspiring authors that you're going to encounter some hard that you didn't expect. And I know your particular situation with this subject is, would you mind sharing just a little bit about your journey, and maybe possibly even sharing with other future authors, anybody listening to this, if they're sitting on the fence, um, what was your journey like? A summary of your journey.
So the first thing that when you said that came to my mind is with especially with the feminine and masculine aspect. Actually, it was a mentor of mine that was a man that called me out on my writing about 3 or 4 years ago, and I was going through a training for a modality that I use, and he had pulled my chart, which was my soul contract chart, and he was using me as an example. And he knew my training and he knew my background. And he really just kind of like called out the fact that I was hiding behind my training and that masculinity because it was comfortable to me. And so that kind of leads to my story with what's in the book is I had been doing that for so long that my body physically could no longer handle the pressure of that any longer. And it became very sick. And so through that process, I had to learn how to embrace who I was in my feminine, because even though I was feminine at like times, but not in the spirit, I was in the physicality of it. I could dress up and I could do all the things and be really pretty and do all that stuff. But it was the inside, the heart stuff that wasn't unlocking. And so when he called me out in that meeting, and he did it very lovingly, so I'm not saying he called me out in a harsh way, but in a way he did. But by it being a man who did that, it really kind of set me back on my heels because I wanted to get defensive and I wanted to bring out that masculine part of me and like protect myself in a way. And I realized I couldn't. And that's what he was getting to. And so that kind of translated into my illness, into my whole journey with the plant, the story, all of that. So it's one of those things like, and he wasn't the person that initially called me out like on that aspect, but it was my illness that did. And then he just kind of solidified that. And then when I submitted both articles to James, and another man calls me out and says, no, we're not using this. This is too much in your head. It really like, I had to think about how I was going to respond a third time to being, in a masculine space with the healthcare system and then being in a masculine space with my training. And then, James, it was all very much kind of like thrown in my face, like, hey, you're not in your feminine, and I'm the woman in the whole situation. And I was struggling with it. And these men were doing it better than I was. And that's what really kind of was like for me as part of the journey of figuring out who I am in that energy and in that space. So I hope that answers your question.
Just take it however you want to. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, you know, I love that you shared the call out, because we do tend to want to get defensive, especially if we live in a narrative that we feel is the absolute truth, that defensiveness comes up to protect that narrative. And I think that that's what's so important about becoming an author in the realm that we are writing books to love and encourage and inspire other people, is giving ourselves permission to be okay, to be called out lovingly. It's obviously one thing if it's a harsh versus loving. And I think that that's such a beautiful part of all of our stories. If we can get past that ego, get past that defensiveness, and really know that people are out there to love us. And love shows up in so many different ways. Love shows up in somebody sharing their story. Love shows up in people calling us out on things that they can see within us because they want better for us. Not that they want to change us, but they want us to see what they see. And I think that that really is such a beautiful foundation of how all of us showed up for ourselves, for our families, through these stories, through everything. And we are sharing our stories in a sense of a love story, in terms of we love you enough to be vulnerable, to share and feel the discomfort in a temporary place, so that we can love you enough, even if we've never met you. We're not going to meet most of the readers of this book, but we love you enough to step into our heart so that you can step into a different part of your journey. So I really appreciate you sharing that, because that's such a huge element to really kind of the purpose. We didn't go into this book going, okay, this is the theme, this is the whatever. It was to share your story. And then after the edits and everything, there was like this theme that came together. And I think that that's so important, to allow people to use their voices authentically in an anthology like this. Like, it's great to have like an idea, but be intentional to not have expectations in certain places. And I think that this was absolutely the place to not have expectations, because when you read the book, it's gonna show up. And all of our stories are so different and yet so the same. And that's life. We're all humans with all different stories, but everything just looks a little bit differently. And I think that that's, the difference between having compassion and then having judgment for others. And so you're just such a special person to me. So I love that we get to do this together. Based on your experience over the last, I don't know, 9 months now, what words of inspiration or advice or anything that you feel would you give to aspiring authors that were kind of in the same place you were in, that right person, that right team, that right group of people, whatever is on your heart, because we're all about sharing from the heart in these podcasts. What would you tell people that are like, okay, I'm going to say yes, I'm going to go for it? What would you like to share to them?
I think of a word that you just said, because when you were talking, I thought of the anxiety I personally had when I first started this process with you and James. Because I've known Rachelle outside of this environment, and Rachelle goes with the flow. She is a planner, but not like I planned. And so I knew once I took the leap, and that was the biggest part, is even though I had been pushed and I had, been called out and told to do it and had been asked multiple times to be a part of books, I never uh, pushed myself to make the first step. And so that's what I would say is if you're wondering, or even if you've been like, oh, I feel like I should write a book. Yeah, you should write a book. That's source telling you, or spirit, God, whatever you want to call it, telling you, I needed you to tell your story and whatever that story is. But also once you get past that initial like jumping off the cliff, you just better be ready for the free fall because that's literally what it has felt like for me. And I'm being completely vulnerable here because I've had this situation start 9 months ago where I just completely free fell. Like there was like we kind of knew where we were going with the book. Like we all knew like the thing that bound us together, in our stories, but how it happened and the flow and the timing and all of that was completely out of my grasp. Like I just had to release it and just go with the flow because I had no control over a lot of the elements. And for me, that was very uncomfortable. And interestingly enough, I've had a couple opportunities over the summer that I've had the same thing happen and I've just had to like release it again and again. And I'm like, I know that this is a place in my life where I just have to release and just go with the flow. Like literally jump on the life raft and just float. And so for me, that's been the most scary thing, but also it's kind of a relief to be quite honest. So for especially the moms that are out there that like to have the control, like to know the next thing, like to plan everything, be, 6 months out, got the calendars, all that stuff, throw all that mentality away when you go to write a book or write your story or wherever you write it. I don't care. Like, I hope you write with Rachelle, though. I'm going to put that plug there because it's going to really challenge you to let go and let flow. So there you go.
I love that. Let go and let flow. I think one of the things that I've learned about myself is that I feel honored that people trust me enough to walk out hard journeys together. That just says it all. So I want to take a moment and say thank you for trusting me enough to continue to push through all the hard, even when a lot of us wanted to just be like, okay, I might give up. I might
Right.
just say, I'm bailing out. I'll do it another time. Now's not the time. Because when we're faced with life, I don't even want to call them challenges because it gives us the expectation that life is always supposed to be seeking the joy and the happiness and all of that. Everything needs to have balance. And so if we are always seeking that, we dishonor the process that gets us to those moments. And that's what they are. Life is full of moments of ups and downs. And as long as we throw out that victim mentality and just flow, like you said, that I tend to like to do, it's because I already know that things are waiting for me, waiting for you, waiting for everybody. I just don't know what it looks like. And there's no amount of preparation in life to be ready. But if we already accept that it will, we are. And that's as simple as that. So thank you so much for sharing all of this. I want to give you an opportunity to share anything that might be on your heart, whether it's about the book, whether it's about the writing process, anything. This is my favorite part about podcasts that I just feel is always so necessary for everyone to just be seen and heard as an individual. So would you care to share anything that you just feel the listeners need to hear today?
Boy, could I say a lot of things. But
You can.
one, write. I just sit down and write. And that's the thing that has been the most freeing for me in this process because now I write almost every day. It's become like part of my daily habits that I just do. I write, it could be I mean, and I even say that don't let it be content. Don't let it be social media stuff. Just sit down, pen to paper, computer to, your fingertips, whatever, and just write, like whatever comes to you, and just let it come. And that's the beauty of it, because I have, for me anyways, this has been my process in the last, especially like the last 3 or 4 months, because I kind of go through ebbs and flows with my life just because of my kids' activities and my husband's business and things like that. So I have times where I have a whole lot of time, and then there's times where I have very little time. And what I do with that little bit of time to take care of myself is super important. And writing now has become absolutely a joy. And even sometimes in the mess and the chaos of it, like you should see my computer. I had to organize a little bit the other day because I'm now writing on a platform on a regular basis. And to try to keep all of the thoughts and where I'm going with those things has been scary, but it's also been very freeing, because like your body no longer is holding on to that. And that's what I want to share with our listeners is, when we hold all of that stuff inside energetically, it can affect us, and who we are. And letting, even if nobody reads it, I mean, I have stories that nobody will ever read because they're for me. They're for not for anybody else. And somebody may in the future, and they're like, what in the heck was my mom thinking? Or what was my wife like? They'll be wondering, but it was just for me, because I needed to process out something that happened in life. And oftentimes we want to like hide and mask or veg, and there's nothing wrong with those things, or scroll social media to deal with our emotions. And that's not always the most effective for us energetically and physically. So writing that out, I think, is super huge to people in order to be able to create, heal, move forward, and just discover who they are as a person. So for me, that's been the process. So that's what I wanted to share. Like, just do it.
I love
Until.
that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, you know, I have discovered through my journey that writing is the best therapy. I am not much of a talker. And so things like talk therapy or something like that is just not my thing. Plus, I don't really like sharing with other people on that avenue. But in terms of writing, you get to tell yourself, it's such an interpersonal therapy for me, like, and for so many, you get to tell yourself the truth,
Yeah.
process the truth or discover the truth through writing. Sometimes you'll start something and then you'll go back to it, reread it, and go, oh, that was a few months ago. That was a few months ago self, right? I have grown since then. And so I really feel like that's a lot of why I want to get people's stories out, is to take them on that journey and make sure that they just embrace that inner self. It's another form of healing. It's another form of, we talk about the cannabis plant in this book, hemp specifically, and the choices that you make. And this is another choice, the choice to write. And so I just love that you shared that, because it's just continuing that wellness journey, right? So that was kind of a theme in the book in terms of just finding and discovering what worked best for us. And it's not just about the hemp plant. So I truly appreciate your time and all of your beautiful words of inspiration and vulnerability. So thank you so much, Rachel, for being on today. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to people receiving what is meant for them through your chapter. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Until next time, bye.